Welcome to Charts Today, Europe Opening, and today's edition for Thursday, the 1st of November, comes to you from London. We start by looking at the dollar index. Dollar sinking a little bit lower this morning, but still bullish on all three timeframes. So that dollar strength, having made the 16-month high this week, the dollar is still looking very strong. Euro recovering quite a bit against the dollar this morning, though, but still in that bearish territory. And we see the dollar falling back against the yen, so it's quite marked here as well. Sterling jumped overnight and has continued this morning on the news that a Brexit deal for the city is more imminent, and so that's taken sterling into bullish territory against the dollar and against the euro. We're seeing that rise as well, and against the Swiss franc as well. We're seeing sterling pushing a lot higher there too. Um, the Aussie dollar, we're seeing sterling not quite breaking the barrier there. Bitcoin still sitting relatively flat after Tuesday's fall. We did see a bit of a jump yesterday, but we're in bearish territory still with downside targets all activated, so it's still bad news for Bitcoin. US stocks recovered yesterday further, and we were up 1% on the S&P 500 index. We're not yet into bullish territory on the short or medium term charts, and the Nasdaq also was up, but still bearish on that short and medium term chart. The Dow up just under 1% as well. The Dow looking like it might be recovering on the short-term chart a little bit ahead of the other indices. And the Russell 2000, of course, has had a really bad run of late and is still bearish on the medium and long-term charts despite a rise yesterday. The futures this morning, the S&P future is up 0.2% and the Nasdaq future up 0.1%. So no clear signs yet as to which way the market will open. And if we look at the FTSE 100 index, we're down 0.2%. That's stronger sterling weighing on blue chips for the earnings. Looking at the mid caps, we're seeing that recovery there on the short-term chart. We've got an upside target of 4%. On the FTSE, that recovery is also in train, and we've got an upside target of potentially 6%. So we are seeing European markets showing signs of turning on those short-term trends. The DAX also an upside target of 6%, but hasn't quite made it through the cloud on the 60-minute chart. The CAC Quarant actually had a very good day yesterday, and here we are bullish and with an upside target of 4%. Japan falling back about 1% down, and the Hang Seng actually up 1.75%. And China still bearish, but holding fairly steady, didn't rise very much overnight. The Sensex in India, much the same, fairly flat, and the Aussie market fairly flat as well. Seeing renewed bearish sentiment in crude oil. We're back to $74 and WTI at $64. So we're into the low 60s and 70s for these products, and that is showing the bearishness there. Meanwhile, US nat gas is actually looking stronger. Gold sitting a little bit better this morning, up 1% on the slightly weaker dollar, but still bearish on that short-term chart. And silver, similarly, we're just up, but still not quite making it through to the bullish trend. US Treasury yields sitting back at 3.16%, so looking bullish again there short term. So that's quite key. Looking at the Asian region, we saw most areas. We saw the Nikkei was down, not quite bearish on the long-term chart, but that the medium-term charts are bearish, and we have underperformed the Dow by about 8% this year. Looking at the Hang Seng again, would take a lot to turn this chart bullish now, and the same really for China. China with multiple downside targets, new lows would activate a new downside target, and we've got a lot of downside targets here for China, so that is still a worry. US stocks last night driven by tech. Tech led us into the rise this year, then into the crisis, and now tech's leading us back out. Alphabet up 4%, Google not looking as strong as it was, and still bearish on that medium-term chart despite yesterday's big move. Apple, we're seeing, actually was up 2.6%, holding on to its relative outperformance. Whilst Apple outperforms the market, the biggest stock in the market, whilst Apple outperforms the market, then the market continues to perform. But interestingly, we're seeing Facebook is up 4% yesterday, but maybe just finding some long-term support on the cloud here. But we do have big targets still hanging over us and an underperformance on the Dow of 18% this year. Looking at Microsoft, we see they were up quite strongly yesterday at nearly 3% at 106, holding on to their relative strength, flattening, just not outperforming but not underperforming either. Netflix, we're seeing, had a relatively strong day, up nearly 6%, but they are underperforming the market. We see they had doubled versus the market, and now they're up actually just 50% higher, so they've come back quite a bit. Nvidia really has given up a lot of its outperformance in the last few weeks, as we really see here, and so Nvidia now has clear downside targets, still a worry there. And Tesla, we're seeing also holding on to its gains of the last week and sitting steady, so that's showing some inherent strength there. Looking to the Aussie market, we had a lot of top performers here. It's a very mixed picture again. We've got Orocobre up 11.7%, but still looking bearish. A lot of these charts we're seeing big rises but bearish charts, and that's basically the similar picture here with Bellamy's, a long-term fall and a 10% gain overnight, but still charts very bearish. And the same on the downside, we're seeing some pretty big falls here, 9% on Ausdrill, and that's taking them into long-term bearish territory with downside targets. And we're seeing that a lot across the board. The Nifty, similarly, we see here the best performance was Yes Bank, and Yes has actually had some pretty good performances in terms of the leaderboard, but we have really fallen away. So the chart is still pretty bearish. And looking at the downside for India, we're seeing lots of stocks still falling quite heavily. So it's a very volatile market. Chinese stocks, fairly mixed picture. We saw as many rises as gainers, really, probably a little bit more on the gainers side, but little change on the index. Hang Seng, we did actually see a lot more gainers because the index was up quite sharply there. Country Garden Holdings up 9%, for example, but still a bearish looking chart and have halved relative to the Dow this year. And Tokyo was quite bloody because we did have a lot of falls, and Mitsui down 21%. So we're seeing really big potential falls in this market. The market easily spooked by any bad news. Looking at the FTSE this morning, we can see the top performers in here. We see BT Group is up 7%, but again, it's looking better on the medium-term chart, and we are seeing signs of recovery. We're not yet through on the long term, so quite interesting there. Looking at the fallers, not as many fallers as you'd expect, but AstraZeneca down, BP down 2.3%. An interesting Shell down on quite strong results, but they just slightly disappointed the market. So we're seeing here oil companies really just falling a little bit there, and the theme on the bigger caps is we are seeing banks actually up, looking quite strong here, Barclays, Lloyds. But again, we're seeing downtrends. It's really key. So even though we're seeing performances, we're seeing stocks in downtrends. On the 250, we're seeing on the FTSE 250, Dairy Crest is the worst performer, down 3%. They have been a star over a long term, but in the last couple of years they've really fallen away and given up a lot of those gains. We might be seeing an end there with the relative starting to recover, but still looking pretty bearish. If we look at Spire Health Group, they're up 6% today, but again the chart's very bearish. It's a theme. We're seeing bearish charts. This accidental actually holding on to their bull trend long term, but medium term it's cracking there. So we are just seeing that, and Just Group also bearish there as well. Taking a look over to Europe, just in terms of the Euro Stock 600, again all this data coming from Yahoo. We see Lind down 24%, so really big fall there this morning. TGS down 9%. So again, we do see stocks. Credit Suisse came out with strong results, but down 3%, just not quite as good as expected, and showing really their underperformance here. They've underperformed the Dow some 26% this year. And taking a look at the positive side, we see here we've got quite a lot of stocks up 15%, Belarus in Sweden, ASM International in Amsterdam. But again, a lot of these charts bearish, BT Group featuring there, as we were just saying. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.